You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
I'm doing really well. I didn't try and catch anything before we started recording today because I'm going to try and get out of that.
Is that because you're learning?
No, because you're learning.
Well, one hopes.
It's harder to.
You're never too old to learn.
That's true.
I'm 73, and apparently I learned something.
Yes, you are learning how to avoid that, and I'm learning that you are avoiding that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I was in graduate school, which you remember fondly.
You hope.
Well, no, actually, you don't remember it fondly. I was being facetious and sarcastic. But I remember going into, so the first class that you take when you go to counselor school is called, what the heck is the name of that first class? Oh, Foundations. Foundations.
Welcome to counseling.
Yeah. Well, essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And basically, that class teaches you a little bit of what confidentiality is, a little bit about theories, a little bit about nonverbal behavior. So it's basically a sampler of all of the other classes that you're going to then have that are going to go into much more depth. But I remember being introduced to the concept of rational emotive therapy by Albert Ellis and feeling as if every question that I had ever had about psychology had been answered.
I don't think that was unusual. It may have been your experience there, but I taught in the university programs for probably 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it was a very common experience that people coming in to those classes had an agenda. Why are you here? Well, a number of them would say, I'm on a mission from God. Mm-hmm. I want to help people. I'm here to save people.
Well, I come from a really dysfunctional family.
Or they wanted to get psychological education and counseling on the cheap, because at least after you got your degree, you could go out and work in the field, and you didn't have to pay for therapy. But the point, I digress. The point I wanted to make was a very common reaction when you study one of these philosophical areas or theoretical areas is to go, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense. And I can look around my life and I can populate this theory with people that I know. Oh, that's my mother, that's my next door neighbor, that's my boss. And then you think, oh, that's my answer. I'll be an RET therapist. And then you study the next one. And the next one you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. That's my aunt, that's my sister, I'll be that kind of therapist, and no matter what it is. And so I think this naturally fell into your construct for how you think and how do you process data and approach problem solving, and it struck a nerve with you, and you've kind of hung on to it. And
while I still love rational emotive therapy, still like talking about rational emotive therapy, teaching rational emotive therapy, I came to a point where I felt as though rational emotive therapy didn't explain everything because it's not a motivational theory, so it doesn't tell me what drives the human psyche. It's a great explanation for how we wind up believing the things that we do, how we wind up with the irrational beliefs that we have, and how we can counter those, but not the genuine motivation.
It offers an opportunity for brief, short-term interventions so that you get behavioral change and you feel like you've made progress.
Right.
What it doesn't acknowledge is that people that do that and make those behavioral changes generally, I learned how to give up a phobia. Your phobia of spiders is irrational, and you don't need to be afraid of spiders. And I learned why that's so. And then I turn around and have a different phobia. now I'm afraid of coffee cups.
Right.
It does, because it's not rational.
Right.
But I just get a replacement behavior that follows the same script, and so I have the same issues. But it looks as if I made change.
Yes. Absolutely.
It's not foundational. It's not permanent.
Right. And so that's very consistently the case when you have individuals that suffer from general anxiety disorder. So they come to you and they'll say, oh, I have this thing where I feel like I need to wash my hands because we've just had a pandemic and I'm really worried about germs. And you will help them work through that, and you'll get them to a place where they'll feel less like they need to wash their hands. Yeah. But then
they discover they can't go out the front door. They have to go out the back door.
Yeah.
The front door's
right.
And it's not a rational thing, but it is a thing, and it limits and restricts and constricts their behavioral options.
Because the energy that creates that anxiety isn't dissipated just because you change the target of the focus.
You want to tell us about cathexis?
Yeah. So so you have to get to where is the energy coming from, what's motivating that energy. And so then that's when I started to get into more psychodynamic theories, specifically object relations. Yeah. But in the beginning, rational emotive therapy just seemed like such a great answer because it was so well defined. So when you do a scientific experiment, when you identify a variable, like if I say I'm going to measure intelligence, that's a variable. I have to define it. I'm going to measure it how? Well, I'm going to do a Wechsler intelligence scale for adults.
You're doing it again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do it all the time.
You do it all the time. Let's go back to Albert Ellis and one of his most famous example experiments. He had a client that said, I cannot get a woman to have sex with me. I asked this woman to have sex with me. She laughed at me. She rejected me. So I'm not ever going to have sex. And Albert Ellis said, that's ridiculous. That's a false assumption that you were making. It's a false script. He said, I'm going to give you a homework assignment. You go stand on the corner of X and Y in New York City at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the first 100 women that walk past, you just say, hello, would you have sex with me? And the guy was like, oh my God, I can't do that. I'll get arrested. I'll get slapped. I'll get shot. I'll get whatever. And Ellis said, find out. Do it. Do it behaviorally and see what the data show. And so the guy asked a number of people, and he did get slapped, and he did get rejected, and the cops did get called. But he also had a number of women say, sure. And I don't know what the numbers were. It's not relevant to the explanation.
I don't know if the numbers were ever reported, but I've done exactly that. Not exactly that. I've done something similar to that when I have adolescent clients who say, boy, I'd really like to find a girlfriend. And I say to them, okay, so let's do a thought experiment. If you went out and asked 100 girls to go out with you, how many of them would say yes? And they inevitably say, I don't know, 25, 30. And I say, well, I think that's probably low. But even if that's the case, so if you go out and ask 10, how many would say yes? Well, I'm 3. I say, okay, how many do you need? Well, we need 1. Well, then go ask 10 girls. And you'll get at least 1 acceptance. So, we lock ourselves into these irrational belief systems.
Which becomes self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can't see beyond the irrational belief, and then we create the very undesirable outcome that we're afraid of because of, yes, what you say, which is the self-fulfilling prophecy.
And you torture yourself with all these qualifications and complications. Like, well, okay, but I could never get a date with a blonde. Well, then only ask blonde girls.
Exactly.
But they won't say it. So then what you're telling me is you could get a date with a redhead or a brunette, but you don't want to.
Right.
And say, well, go ask them out. And then if they go out with you and you like them, ask them if they'll dye their hair.
I was just going to say, just ask them to dye their hair. Exactly, right. But we construct these views of reality that we feel constricted to live within, and we never consider actually going out and challenging those views. And so,
they would never hire me.
Right.
Well, did you fill out an application? Did you tell me you wanted the job? Well, no. Why not? Well, I'm sure I'm not qualified.
Because they'll never hire me.
They'll never hire me.
Right. So Ellis talked about this model, and this is what, for me, was so elucidating and made so much sense. And so he talked about an ABC model, and actually you can even go ABCDE, where A is the activating event. So something happens, it triggers some kind of response in us. And then B is the belief that we have, and C is the consequence. And so what I've always talked to people about is, if the activating event is, I have a flat tire, and the belief is, this is horrible, this is terrible, these bad things always happen to me, then the C, the consequence, is going to be what?
Bad.
Yeah. You're going to punch the steering wheel, you're going to kick the tire.
Well, I remember as an adolescent, I grew up in a violent alcoholic home, and my parents, in my lifetime, never went to church. But we lived near a Methodist church. And they sent us.
You could hear the hymns being sung on Sunday morning.
That was a different experience, but they sent us to church all the time.
Uh-huh.
And one period of time, we had this preacher that was a hell of a preacher. I mean, he could give a sermon that would really move people. And I stayed after church one Sunday to talk to him about my family. And I told him some of the horror stories that were going on. He was so compassionate, and he listened so well, and I felt so good about getting some support. And then I walked home, and when I got home, my father was standing there with a switch, big switch he cut off the tree, and he beat me badly because I had broken the rule of the alcoholic family.
You told somebody.
I told somebody. And so the lesson that I learned from that was never trust a preacher.
Yeah.
Never trust a preacher. Now, I was an adolescent, so now I'm an old man.
Did the preacher tell your dad?
Yes, he called him.
He called him,
even though he told me he wouldn't. I mean, by the time I got home,
he had already
had a conversation. Which, of course, my dad was in politics and sales, and he was like, "Oh, he's just an out of control adolescent. We have so much trouble with him, and blah 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 blah." And he's lying. And the preacher's like, "Well, yeah, okay. Can you send me a donation?" So for many years, I was very convinced that you can't trust preachers. And I still have shades of that occasionally. But I've found a number in my lifetime that have been very honorable, very trustworthy, and
which is ironic, because I know that there are many people who have said to you that you
should be a preacher,
should be a Baptist minister. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So what then Ellis did was that he built an entire repertoire of what are the most commonly held irrational beliefs that people can engage in. And one of the things that he said is that anytime you use language, so Ellis was very, very into this idea that language was important, which you and I both believe is true.
Words matter.
And so anytime you use words like should or ought or must, those are always lies.
Yes.
Anytime you think a thought that I should be X or I must do Y, anytime that pops into your head, that's always a lie.
So you as a clinician, you try to teach your client to have a little alarm go off when you hear that come out of your mouth. Recognize, hey, I just used that word, and then look around for consequences. Because what you want to do is get ahead of the curve. Eventually, you want them to learn to change that word from I should do this to I will do this, or I won't do that, whichever it is.
Right.
And then live with the results, live with the consequences.
Right. Exactly.
But the should imposes a burden that restricts your options, and it's a script that was written for you by somebody else. You should or you shouldn't talk about the family if you live in an alcoholic family. I mean, they're going to put so much pressure on you. We have to be the looking good family. You have to always be clean and dressed right, and you have to do well in school, make good grades, and you have to do this and that and the other. And if you fall short of that, you're destroying the family. You put the family in jeopardy.
And so in therapy, what we want to do is to push up against those shoulds.
Yeah,
and so if somebody says, oh, I should do X, I should be a better parent, and then what I'll say to them is, okay, so is there a law that says that? Well, no. Okay, so then why should you do that? Well, it would make my family run better. Okay, so it would be advantageous if you were able to be more flexible as a parent.
See, I would break it down even further. If you should do that, what are the consequences if you don't?
Well, that's what we're getting. Yeah, is what are the consequences? Because once you get to a place where you identify the consequences, then you can say to the person, "Can you live with that?"
I remember one time when my oldest child was fairly young, and I was trying to teach him, you can't go in the street without an adult. You can't go out of the yard. If you kick a ball out in the street, you can't go get it without getting an adult to go with you, because cars are dangerous and you get run over. And so we got busy playing, kicked the ball across the street and ran across the street to get it. And I was standing in the yard when he came home with the ball, and you could just see his face blanch. And I said, son, if you do this again, there are going to be consequences. You're going to get a spanking. So I have to tell him what the consequence is going to be. If you do this behavior, there will be a consequence. The consequence will be a spanking. The little sucker looked at me and said, how hard? Yeah. That's not what I want you to say. That's not what I want you to hear. Yeah, let's go back and revisit the conversation.
Yeah.
Because obviously my messaging was off base, and I wasn't speaking a language that he was responding to.
Oh, I think you were speaking a language that he was responding to very well. He was weighing whether or not he's willing to pay the consequence.
And that's what we want to teach clients to do. You recognize that every behavior you have pays dividends and cost consequences.
Right.
And so then you have to do emotional economics. Let's see, is your behavior worth the price that you have to pay to have it?
So let's take a break and we'll pick this up on the other side.
Okay.
Hey, Brett.
Yes.
What's your favorite thing about Psych with Mike?
The opportunity to engage in mental gymnastics with you.
Wow, that is really powerful. So
it's fun.
Do you think that that's beneficial for other people?
I have no clue. I would hope so, but I have no clue.
So people should write us and let us know.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
That would be great.
Especially if they agree with me.
As always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. So you and I are old.
Yeah, older than dirt.
Do you remember a television show in the 1970s called Beretta?
When one guy had a cockatiel on his shoulder?
Yeah. And the theme song said, don't do the crime if you can't do the time.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right. And so my point... Robert Blake, yeah.
Yeah, hey, I'm good.
Whenever I talk to clients, that's what I tell them is, if somebody's willing to do the time, you can't stop them from doing any crime.
Exactly.
So don't try and do that, because people will always think, like you're saying with your son, I told him you're going to get a spanking. He wanted to know how hard, because he wanted to know, am I willing to do the time? And if I'm willing to do the time, you can't stop me from doing the crime.
Well, those are conversations you have then with parents when the family comes in for family counseling and their parenting issues and discipline issues. You talk to them about never assign a consequence that doesn't have value to the child. It may have value to you, and it may be what you learned as a child growing up. Spank your kid. What I learned was my kid wasn't really spankable. I need to find some other consequence that would leverage his behavior. And that was an epiphany for me. It said, wait a minute, maybe what we don't do here is hit somebody. Maybe what we don't do is spank somebody. Maybe there's a better way. And so then I started to find other ways to manipulate him into behaving the way that I wanted, with consequences that had meaning for him. And whether they had meaning for me or not. And so when I would consult with parents who were trying to discipline a child, especially a teenage boy, I would say to them, don't listen to the words as much as you listen to the behavior.
Absolutely.
Because they're going to say, say, well, you're grounded. I don't care.
Right.
You can't watch TV. I don't care. And so then the parent will say, well, he doesn't care. I say, look and see if his behavior changes.
Or they'll say, oh, so that doesn't hurt? Well, I'll find something.
I'll raise the price.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, when I tell people...
I danced that dance many times.
Once you get to the point where you're saying, oh, if that doesn't hurt, I'll find something that does, you've stopped giving a consequence, and now you're very much into, causing pain. And that's never going to be productive. That's never going to
and ask
elicit.
yourself, is that how you want to parent?
Yeah, right.
As a father, is that who you want to be?
Right.
That may have been who your father was. You may have grown up with that, and you just automatically absorbed it with your morning coffee.
Yeah.
But you can write a new script. And you can be a different dad.
To me, that's the difference between a consequence and a punishment. So a consequence is about giving the offender the opportunity to recognize the error of their ways. A punishment is about making the victim feel better.
Or the punisher feel better.
Yeah.
I've showed you. You're not going to behave
and the
that
punisher
way.
is usually representing the victim, right? So if in society, if we punish criminals, then the punisher is representing the victim, and it's designed to help the victim feel better, feel safer in society, whether or not that's ever achievable.
Yeah. I get lost in all of that. To me, the point becomes, what is the behavioral goal for the parent? What do you want to teach your child? How do you want your child to behave? And you have to find consequences that steer that behavior. If you get caught up in punishments, then it's about power. It's about asserting your will over them and making them be afraid. I remember my father saying to me many times, I don't care if you love me, you will fear me. And that was his entrenched ideology. He was going to make his children afraid of him so that when he snapped his fingers or he barked or spoke,
they would heave too.
They would, jump too. That's right. He would say, when I say jump, you ask how high on the way up. You don't stop and have a conversation. So I was parented that way, and I think reflexively I began to parent that way. But that little episode with my son Robert, it caused me to begin to re-examine some of that.
So the A is the activating event, the B is the belief, the C is the consequence, and then if we add on to that, the D is a disputation, and the E is an effect. So what we want to do is to dispute the validity of those irrational beliefs so that we can come to a truer, more honest view of ourselves. And, So if I say I'm driving my car, I got a flat tire, this is horrible, this is terrible, I can't stand it, bad things always happen to me, then I'm going to feel rotten, right? If I dispute that, well, you know what? Do bad things always happen to me? Well, I've driven this car many, many times, and I very rarely get a flat tire. So it doesn't.
I have 4 tires. They're not all flat.
It doesn't always happen to me. And so when we look at the situation more objectively and we dispute what's going on with that irrational belief, we're taking some of the power of that away, and we're actually going to have the effect is going to be that we're going to feel differently about it. Right? So if I have a flat tire, the solution is to do what?
Change the
tire. Yeah. But if I'm punching the steering wheel and kicking the tire and break my toe, now, right, I haven't actually created the solution. I've created additional problems. And that's what we do, is that we oftentimes just find ourselves on that spiral. We're circling the toilet bowl and just waiting until the bottom drops out and we fall through. And we don't have to live that way.
I remember when I was a younger adult, and I had a car that needed a tune-up, and I was trying to figure out how to do it myself, and I was changing the spark plugs. And I had a spark plug wrench, and I was trying to loosen the spark plug, and the wrench slipped off, and I barked my knuckles across the hot engine, and I threw the wrench into the wall of the garage and screamed in obscenity. My knuckles were bleeding, and my wife was sitting there, and she just started laughing at me. She's like, so how do you feel now? What good did that do you? And she was right. why did I do that? Do you want to be that kind of person? Are you getting the results that you want from the behaviors that you choose? Well, I didn't choose that. Well, yeah, you did, actually. You're a grown man. Nobody made you throw that wrench.
Right.
You threw the wrench to express your anger.
Right.
Is there a different way to say you're angry?
Right.
You say, well, I'm mad now. Will that help? Will that relieve those feelings?
Well,
maybe, maybe not. Maybe you have something else you need to do.
And that's one of the things that I like to explore with clients in therapy is, now if you throw the wrench and you break the wrench or you hit your dog or whatever, then obviously
Make
that's
your hand bleed, you get all of your clothes,
cascading. But if a person actually barks an obscenity, is there any value in that?
There can be.
There can be, absolutely. And people don't recognize there actually could be value. If you're dissipating some of that negative emotion, and then you can go back and continue
in an appropriate way. I mean, back in the late 60s, early 70s, when everyone was caught up with concern about impression by Japanese factory management systems. They were trying to bring them over to the United States. And
I remember that. People were doing calisthenics out in the yard.
Yes. But they also, in the Japanese factories, they had a room that the workers could go to if they were upset about something, and they had these little knockdown dummies that you punch and they roll over, and they had pillowcases with the photographs of the managers. And so if you were mad at your manager, you'd go get his pillowcase and put it on a dummy and beat the crap out of the dummy and get some relief without causing your manager or you to be in a situation where you would have negative consequences. And I used to, in marriage counseling, when I first learned about marriage counseling, there were counselors who used what were called batakas. They were foam rubber clubs, and they'd hand them to couples who were having fights and say, hit each other with these clubs, which I never bought into. I'm not into physical violence. But what I did learn from that is, especially dealing with adolescents, if you could give them a wiffle ball bat or something, and take them down in the basement and mark off a circle and say, if you're inside this circle and you can beat the foundation post in the basement, you just beat it to hell with your wiffle ball bat, and you can say any words you want to say. You can call me a name, you can cuss, you can say darn it or whatever I've forbidden you to say elsewhere. You can get some relief here in this protected environment. And it's
when you walk out the circle.
Yeah. And I won't punish you for that. There won't be any negative consequence if you do it here. Now, if you do it up in the kitchen with your mother and you hit her with a baseball bat or the wiffle ball bat, then there are going to be some consequences.
Or if you're hitting the foundation pole, you're cursing like a longshoreman, and you step out of the circle, now you have to be composed.
Appropriate language, But the point being, there is relief that they can get. They can drain all those really powerful negative emotions and leave them in that spot.
Right.
And come out and be better.
Right. And so the point is that we need to have that cathartic experience.
Yes.
We need to be able to bleed off the negative emotion.
So you don't get road rage. You can't drive that way and kill people.
Because that can actually lead to actually solving the problem. So if you busted your knuckles and you said... bad word, and then you went back to changing the spark plugs, that actually could be a positive. Now, if you fling the wrench and put a hole in the garage wall, and
and then you got other problems.
Now you got more
jobs to do.
Right?
Yeah, because you're an idiot. Yeah.
So just because a person engages in what some people would say is inappropriate behavior, like cursing, doesn't automatically mean that's bad. It's the resulting behavior, and you're always want to redirect me. What's the resulting behavior? What's the resulting behavior? And if the resulting behavior is I say the bad word and I go right back to work, that's actually a good thing.
As long as you didn't say the bad word to a person or in a place or situation that escalated the consequence.
Right. I think that Pudd'nhead agrees.
Yeah.
And just Pudd'nhead is what I affectionately call my daughter's dog. So, but
you're weird.
Yeah. So I want people to recognize that just because you say the obscenity doesn't automatically mean that that's bad, because people will beat themselves up and say, well, I can't get it because, I got to find some way to be able to discharge that energy just, instantaneously. Yes, that there can be benefit to that, as long as, again, you don't exacerbate the problem. So the most commonly held irrational belief is,
I don't know. I don't have any.
I am unlovable.
See? How would I know that?
Yeah, because you're so universally
I'm so well
loved.
balanced and universally
You've never
loved.
experienced that.
I have never been rejected.
Yeah. So what Ellis found is that if you, because we've always talked about how psychology is peeling an onion, and there's always layers and layers and layers, that if you
and it makes you cry a lot.
If you get to, you peel that onion back and you peel it back and you peel it back, like the first time, the person might say, oh, my irrational belief is that I'm a bad parent. Then my irrational belief is that my parents were a bad parent. And then when you get closer and closer and closer
so
to the
you go
core,
all the way, you peel layer after layer after layer. When you get to the bottom, you find a mustard seed.
Yeah.
And is it a parable?
It's
Parable
yes.
of the mustard. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, it was
But
a biblical reference.
Yes, but when you get down to the core, what people will say is that they feel unlovable. And so all of us, or not all of us, but many of us walk around with this perceptual reality that we are unlovable. When we talked about transactional analysis, we talked about taking off the mask. It comes back
to the script that was given.
To be able to really be genuine and intimate. And that is so frightening for people, because deep down inside, what we feel like is that we're unlovable. And so what we want to do is challenge and dispute that belief. What
my high school counselor told me I shouldn't apply to college because I was too stupid to go. Mm-hmm. Hello.
And what happens if you dispute that belief? What happens? What do you think makes you unlovable? What is it about you? Well, my parents, never loved me. Okay, so maybe your parents
could be about them, not about you.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't have the capacity to love you.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Right. And so when we get to that really core, deep down belief, then we're really trying to encourage people.
So when you deal with an acting out adolescent,
Yeah.
you can say, if you believe it, and if it appears to be objectively true, I have said it to any number of them, you and I both know your parents are crazy as hell. Mm-hmm. The challenge here is, are you going to keep trying to act out, forcing them to change who they are? Or are you going to learn how to survive until you can get away appropriately and then become your own person? Mm-hmm. You're going to write your own script. Mm-hmm. And that's a stimulating challenge for an adolescent who's acting out, because they get so angry at their parents, like, why are you a bitch? Why are you being this way? And you have to convince them, the thing is, you can't make your parents change their behavior. You can't make them be the idealized parent you want them to be. That's who they are.
And the way that I will present that to a client is to say that, in my understanding of psychology, the individual who is the most psychologically flexible has the greatest ability to change the system. Maybe you're the person who is most psychologically flexible. And if that's the case, then even though you are chronologically younger, you may have the greatest power to actually change this system if you are willing to accept that responsibility. But if you're just going to say, well, I'm the kid, so therefore it's not my job. Okay, it's not your job. I'm not saying it's your job. But you may be the one who has the greatest opportunity. Then if you don't want to accept that, then
you get a kid, you get an adolescent male that says, I didn't choose to be born into this family. You had me, you owe me, whatever. The point, that's irrelevant. The point is, you are here.
Right.
How do you go forward from here?
Right.
So,
do you want to try and make your life better, or do you want to live? And again, that's where you say you got to pick your path and then live with the consequences. Okay, don't try and change the system, but then recognize that this is the system that you're living in.
Periodically, you're going to get beaten up, physically, literally, going to get beaten up. Can you learn to recognize the signals that say it's imminent?
So that you can be safer.
Or spend the night somewhere else. Let somebody else get it.
Yep. So hopefully that is helpful for people. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. You can get us on the internets at psychwithmike.com. You can find us on Facebook at Psych with Mike, on Twitter and YouTube. You can find us at Psych with Mike. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.